Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Helgeson, and I'm here in Heirloom Books at 6239 North Clark Street in Chicago, Illinois, to talk about various works of literature in what is planned to be an ongoing series. For over 40 years, I've been a university instructor and administrator, as well as the coordinator of a prize-winning college literary magazine, a playwright, a one-time novelist, an occasional actor, an art journalist, a theater producer, a publisher of poetry slam inventor Mark Smith's first book of verse, in addition to the work of late 20th century troubadour Richard Famery. In order to begin these presentations here at Heirloom Books, what I wanted to do as a start is to raise a really big question, which is, why read creative literature at all? It's not about real people, and it doesn't provide an accurate historical account of things. I mean, what's the point? Distraction, entertainment, access to the perceptions of other people, to different places, different cultures, different periods of time. Is it simply Emily Dickinson's belief that there is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry? This traverse may the poorest take without oppress of toll. How fugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. Is that enough to justify the time and effort reading can require? Well, according to Harold Bloom in How to Read and Why, you can read merely to pass the time, or you can read with an overt urgency, but eventually you will read against the clock. One of the uses of reading is to prepare ourselves for change. And the final change, alas, is universal. Read because one day you will die. Along that line of thought, a recent Heirloom Books Facebook post stated, "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one." And I might add, a very narrow one at that, a life constrained within the limited confines of personal experience. So, it seems you should read to both enrich your life and prepare yourself for the universal aspects of existence which others have encountered and recorded in a way that is not necessarily true, but rather, ultimately, in a manner that expresses a far more general sense of truth. It's that universal element in literature which makes it worth the time and effort required. Reading literature is not just about things that have happened. It's about something truer than that. Something more fundamental, something more significant than mere history. What literature makes available, I think, is what is probable. What it provides is access to a general expression of the human condition from different places and times and under different circumstances and from uniquely distinct points of view. Reading literature, therefore, it seems to me, significantly serves to enrich a person's understanding of life. As described by the poet and editor Ezra Pound, who helped make the works of Robert Frost, D.H. Lawrence, T.S. Eliot, and James Joyce available to the world, literature is news that is always new. Of course, the debate about the value of literature has raged throughout most of what can be termed recorded history. Plato, sometime around 2,300 years ago, banned imaginative literature from his ideal society, claiming that it distracts people from consideration of the truth, whatever that might be. By contrast, Plato's student Aristotle defended imaginative literature as a positive influence, claiming that within it, moral purpose is combined with pleasure. The Roman writer Horace, 300 years later, in his Ars Poetica, asserted that the purpose of literature is to inform and delight. And then, in the Renaissance, late 1500s, Sir Philip Sidney claimed that imaginative writing combines the liveliness of history with the ethical focus of philosophy to guide readers towards virtue. About 240 years after that, Percy Shelley, the husband of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, asserted that literature provided a civilizing force which teaches by example, and because it is read for pleasure, makes these influences generally available. And so, pleasure, universal understanding, moral enrichment, the experience of other people, access to other places and other times. Now, those seem to me to serve as pretty compelling reasons to read, especially since through the engagement of our imaginations, thanks to the kind of imagery that 20th century poet Marion Moore described as providing imaginary gardens with real toads in them, what's created by the process of reading is an experiential sense of things encountered within a book through the engagement of both the right and hemispheres of the brain, just like actual experience. Cognitive and affective, intellectual and emotional perception created by the vivid imitation of experience as a result of the effective use of language. So that seems to be why someone should read. The next question, of course, is how to go about it. And beyond the ability to interpret visual symbols within a given language and understand vocabulary and syntax, there are numerous ways that have been proposed for people to think about and interpret a text. Now, these have included such approaches as reader response, cultural studies, American multiculturalism, post-colonial studies, new historicism, queer theory, and deconstruction. Following the First World War, for example, the German philosopher Edmund Husserl developed what he termed a phenomenological approach to reading. The text itself, without anything else, an embodiment of the author's consciousness, an objective reality, meaning not simply expressed by language, but created by it. In response, formalism and the new criticism specifically excluded such things as the reader's experience, an author's intention, or the time in which a work was created, to an extent expressed by Dr. William Graham Cole, the former president of Lake Forest College and the author of The Restless Quest of Modern Man, in his introduction to the Pudd'nhead Press publication of my play, Fall from Grace, to an extent that minimalism infected a multitude of fields, including literary criticism, where it was seriously argued that one could fully understand William Shakespeare with no knowledge of Elizabethan England. It was Santayana who observed that those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it, and the failure to understand and appreciate the past is everywhere appallingly evident. The malady is widespread but too rarely recognized, nor seriously therapeutically addressed. Structuralism, then, interpreted a work as being made up exclusively of linguistic conventions in relation to other texts. Psychoanalytic theory has sought to interpret a text as manifest content derived from an author's subconscious, as Sigmund Freud suggested in his essay, The Relation of the Poet to Daydreaming, and or the collective unconscious of the human species, as proposed by Carl Jung in his essay on the relation of analytic psychology to poetry. The idea being, as Kenneth Burke observed in The Philosophy of Literary Form, to discern what a work does for its author may provide a set of generalizations as to what it does for all people. While Marxist literary theory interprets a text in terms of social class struggle, feminist criticism critiques literature and its use of language to explore and expose the various aspects of male domination, and has relatively recently come to include gay and lesbian perspectives through the consideration of the intersectionality of marginalized populations, with issues of race and white privilege also being included within third wave feminism. And postmodernism literary theory has come to the conclusion that, due to various influences of indeterminacy and discontinuity, there can only be a specifically subjective interpretation of any text which is uniquely individual to every person who reads it. For me, although any and all of these approaches can be interesting and produce clearly valuable understandings, first and foremost, I believe that a text should be seen as an artifact, something which should be considered from three distinctly different perspectives: context, content, and craft. Context: when it was created, by whom, and under what circumstances: historical, cultural, social, economic, and personal. Considering the age and gender of a writer, as well as the history of the composition of a work and the time within his or her career during which it was written. Content: what does the work present to the reader in terms of setting, characters, events, patterns of internal references or recurring details, and external allusions, references to things derived from other works, historic circumstances, cultural details. Sequence of events presented and change in status or understanding of either the persons in a narrative or the awareness of the reader, what Aristotle described as a single action having three parts consisting of beginning, middle, and end, the opening circumstance, a challenge to the status quo, what Gustav Freytag in the Technique of Drama termed an inciting incident, a series of rising actions, a crisis or a decision with significant consequence, a declining set of actions, and the resulting new or altered situation. Craft, simply stated, the style of the use of language and the structure of a narrative, whether chronological or some form of non-sequential pattern of organization. This, for me, is what translates into 4 broad questions. What, why, how, and so what? In other words, what does a text say? Why would it say that? How is it said, in style and structure? And the important, impertinent question, so what? What difference does it make? What importance or significance does a work seem to convey? I also think of a text as having manifest, surface, or latent, implied content, and therefore I try to consider it on 4 distinct but directly interrelated levels: literal, moral, psychological, and symbolic. Literal, what it says, manifest content. Moral, the implications of what it says in terms of some sense of good or bad, that defense of creative literature which has been made since the time of Aristotle. Psychological, motivations and general patterns of behavior, whether the characters represented, the author who created them, the reader, or the whole of the human species throughout time and access across the entire face of the earth. And then symbolic, suggested meaning related to other aspects of the human experience. For better or worse, that's my formula. Context, content, craft, what, why, how, so what, manifest, latent, literal, moral, psychological, and symbolic. It's the way I try to think about a work of literature of any kind. And it's the approach that I will, to the best of my ability, be undertaking in terms of any of the works that I attempt to address in a sequence of presentations from here at Heirloom Books. I hope some things I may have to say can be of interest, and I sincerely thank you for taking the time to try and decide. With a suggestion from Maria Clark here at Heirloom Books that the beginning is a very good place to start. The first text that I plan to specifically talk about will be the Epic of Gilgamesh, a narrative that is thought to be the world's oldest story, predating the Iliad of Homer by as many as 1,500 years. That presentation is scheduled to be available in 2 weeks. Until then, I'd very much like to thank you for your attention and wish that you stay both safe and well. Heirloom Books is open from 1 to 7 days a week at 6239 North Clark Street in Chicago, Illinois. And finally, I'd like to mention that the music used before and after this presentation was written by composer Clayton Horath for a production of Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night, in which I played the role of James Tyrone. That was performed just a few blocks from here in the Gunder Mansion of the North Lakeside Cultural Center, what is now a number of years ago. Again, thank you for your attention.